in now.
Good evening. Welcome. Hello, everybody. Happy holidays. I'm Lori Rose, President of the League of Women Voters of Lake Forest, Lake Bluff area, and I'm excited to welcome you to A Vision for Change, an evening with Lake County State's Attorney Eric Rinehart. State's Attorney Rinehart notified me this morning that he had a personal medical situation that he had to attend to, so he may be a few minutes late. We have some things for you prior to his appearance. He will be here shortly. So first of all, a couple of housekeeping matters. Everybody except for our co-host question answer panel has been muted and will remain muted for the duration of the program. This program is being recorded and is owned in its entirety by the League of Women Voters. It may not be reproduced or shown in whole or in part without express written advance permission from the League. It will be available on our website and is part of our criminal justice study. What is our criminal justice study? I know we have some people who are not in the League, so I'll give you a short précis on what that's all about. The League of Women Voters is involved in education and advocacy activities, and prior to advocacy, we take positions on various issues. They could be anything from fiscal tax policy to the environment to criminal justice. How does the League arrive at its positions? It studies these issues in great detail and comes to a consensus, and finally creates a position for advocacy at the various local, state, and national levels. In terms of criminal justice, we're working on our state position now, and believe it or not, it has not been updated in more than 20 years. So for the last 3 years, we've had a group of really enterprising members at the state level who've looked at all aspects of criminal justice. In particular, they looked at the Illinois study that was commissioned and presented in 2016 and created a series of consensus questions for us to study and answer. So as part of our study, we are focusing on each of these questions in great detail, and our League members will be asked to vote on those questions in consensus meetings at the local League level, and also at our Lake County is also doing a consensus meeting. We are working on this program together and in partnership with the Lake County Consensus Criminal Justice Study Group, and I'm very pleased that many of their members are joining us this evening, and especially pleased that Rosemary Heileman, who's our tech host and is also my mentor in all things tech and Zoom, is helping to facilitate this program this evening. So now, Rosemary, I'd like to share a little bit about what these 14 criminal justice topics are that we're looking at. If you could maybe put that slide up. Okay, so they are, as you can see, impoverished communities, bias, gender issues, the need for transparency in data collection, criminal justice coordinating councils, policing, pretrial procedures, restorative justice, emerging adults, courtroom procedures and access, and sentencing laws and procedures. We're also looking at incarceration and supervised release, post-incarceration, which goes into recidivism, and funding. So as you can see, it's a really heady assignment, and we're working our way through it. State's Attorney Rinehart has promised to address several of these topics, and I'd like everybody to put their questions in the chat box. So if they occur to you during my talk or his talk or things that you've thought about before, please put your questions in the chat box and they will be addressed. So while we're waiting for our guest speaker, we thought we would show you a little video, and it's basically about Scandinavian prisons. Why are we showing a video about Scandinavian prisons? The reason is because this video actually highlights a lot of the justice issues that are present in our criminal justice system. It presents an alternative version and something for you to think about as we work through these topics. So now I'd like you to take a look at this video. Thanks.
From a hotel or a fancy college dorm room, there's a gym, common areas, and private bedrooms. But this place, just outside Halden, Norway, is a prison. There's no barbed wire, lots of greenery, and striking contemporary art. Inmates even have pretty great views out of their cell windows. It's all part of a plan to make prisons more humane through design. The underlying philosophy behind humane prison design argues that the look and feel of a prison shouldn't be a punishment.
The sentence is taking away the freedom. Everyday life shouldn't be a sentence.
And the first thing designers focus on is the basic architecture of prison buildings. In most prison architecture, facilities are consolidated into one contiguous building. A courtyard design uses a rectangular building around a central outdoor space. In a telephone pole design, rows of buildings are stacked like a ladder. And radial designs have corridors that branch out from a central hub, like spokes on a wheel. While these layouts are good for moving lots of inmates around efficiently, they restrict prisoners to identical indoor hallways day after day. And tight quarters can unintentionally create tension and conflict. So humane prisons are often laid out in a campus design, where facilities are split between separate buildings with a surrounding perimeter wall. At Norway's Halden prison, housing is located here, while education and visitation spaces are here, in separate buildings. This means most inmates have to start their day with a commute, mimicking life in the outside world and providing easy access to outdoor physical activity. And unlike other layouts, which have windows that look out onto the prison itself, campus design gives inmates a rich view of their surrounding environment. This access to nature also helps inmates track the passage of time.
The inmates felt that they were in a diving bell. They were disconnected with time and with space.
Spending time outside and seeing days and seasons pass through windows helps reduce this problem. Plus, the grounds of humane prisons are usually landscaped carefully. At Halden, tall birch and pine trees dwarf the buildings and obscure the perimeter wall, lending what designers call an anti-authoritarian feel to the campus. Inmates are never made to feel intimidated by the architecture itself. Building materials influence humane design too. In other prisons, interiors are made from hard materials like concrete, linoleum, and steel. Materials like this block light, are visually unappealing, and constantly reflect noise. In prisons like Halden, you'll see glass to let in natural light, and materials like cork and wood to muffle noise. But humane prison design isn't just about architecture and materials. It's also about what happens inside the walls. Halden's design affects the way correctional officers and inmates interact. Because housing is broken up into small communities with a shared kitchen and communal space, correctional officers can easily monitor inmates through regular face-to-face contact, instead of observing large groups of people from a distance. And the guards' rooms are intentionally designed too small to incentivize them to move out into the inmates' common area.
And this, that the guards are together with the inmates, is a very important security system.
Campus layouts help that relationship flourish. A study of architecture in Dutch correctional facilities found that campus design ranked highest in inmate-staff relationships. And US prison studies from the late 90s found that this style of direct contact resulted in fewer violent or security-related incidents. Designing these humane prisons costs money, which is why most of the groundbreaking work is happening in Western Europe and Scandinavia, where smaller prison populations and more robust social support systems allow for more flexible experimentation. And because US prisons often prize cost saving over design, it's still uncommon to see them here. But places like Halden are setting a new precedent for what the prison of the future could look like.
It's so important to have a human behavior towards the people, so they are not so angry, but give them human dignity.
It might feel counterintuitive to create pleasant, well-designed spaces like this for people who have committed crimes. But under a design philosophy like this, being imprisoned is the punishment. The architecture doesn't have to be.
I'm asking you to make a donation right now to help
Oh,
flip.
here, can we
and-
stop the video?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Do we have State's Attorney Rinehart in the program yet? I don't see him here. Okay. So while we're still waiting, I was wondering if some of our criminal justice study members, both from Lake Forest and maybe beyond, could address some of the issues that the video highlights for them.
Is late. He hasn't arrived for this Zoom yet. He's the guest speaker. Well, I think one of the more interesting things the video proposes is, I mean, architecture is fascinating. I'm no expert in it, but I just always found it cool. But I think one of the more interesting thing it proposes is about, it asks us to re-examine fundamental relationships. And I'm going to stop talking because Eric Rinehart is about to.
Ah, okay. I don't see him here.
He's connecting to audio right up there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Just
And I'm gonna, I have to unmute, let me unmute him. Let's see. Where, can somebody unmute him? I'll just, there he goes, he's unmuted. Yeah.
okay. We don't have his video
Go
yet.
ahead and introduce him, and when he starts talking, if you have it on speaker view, you'll be able to see him.
Okay. I'd like to now introduce our guest speaker for the day, Lake County State's Attorney Eric Rinehart. Eric Rinehart was deeply honored on December 1st of this year to be formally inducted as a Lake County State's Attorney. He graduated from Knox College in Galesburg, Illinois in 1998 and graduated from the University of Chicago Law School in 2001. After that, he practiced civil litigation for 2 years at the firm of Schaff and Weiss. And while he was there, he appreciated the importance of a commitment to excellence in legal analysis and courtroom presentation. Following that period, he then joined the Lake County Public Defender's Office in the years 2003 through 2008. During that period, he worked on hundreds of cases on behalf of indigent residents of Lake County. Following that experience, he worked in a private practice with his partner, Kevin Malia, starting in 2008. And he's been first chair on over 70 jury trials, which were tried to verdict, and he has appeared in front of appellate and the state Supreme Court in the state of Illinois. He lives in Highwood with his fabulous wife, Stephanie, and his twins, Sam and Teddy, who are reportedly very rambunctious. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce, it's my great pleasure to introduce State's Attorney Eric Rinehart. Thank you. Eric? Hello?
Let's see. I wonder if he, oh, he can't, it says he can't turn in. Can you speak? Let's see. He should be in the meeting. He's unmuted. Let's see. I can't see what we can do from this end. Let me, let's see. Find his name. There he is. Let me see. I'm gonna.
Oh,
did he? Let's see. I'm gonna ask him to start the video again. So we gave him permission. Oh, you know what? Why don't you experiment, Lori? Try making him a co-host and see if that does any good.
Okay, wait a second. I have to...
That might help.
Oh, I think that's what we needed to do.
Oh, okay.
He was muted.
Okay, good. Let's see if we can hear him now.
I sent him a chat and asked whether he wanted to try to leave the meeting, and we'd let him in again. If in
Oh,
fact
that's a good idea. Okay.
I'm sorry about this, everybody.
Yes.
While we're waiting, maybe Jared could finish his idea about the prison architecture.
Well, I think that it spoke to the idea of fundamentally re-examining what we're trying to do with our judicial institutions, right? It's a lot of the stuff you do, you send in the person, you bring them to trial, you imprison them. We've grown up with it. It's the same way we've always handled things. We've always had cops doing things a certain way. And I think one of the big elements of criminal justice reform is fundamentally rethinking the relationships in institutions and what we're trying to do instead of just doing it because we've always done it. Why do we put people in prisons, and why do the prisons suck? Because, well, that's how we've always done it. The prisons have always sucked. They've sucked since we've built them, right? But the idea of re-examining the purposes, and I think that's something that's come up with regardless of the topic, when it's either reinvesting in communities or pretrial, rearranging the way we handle pretrial issues or the way we handle police reform itself. It's all about re-examining things, and I think the video very succinctly addressed that point, arguably much better than I just did.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Joe.
and a lot of it going from the purpose of the system to punish retribution, and perhaps look at some of the research that says rehabilitation or diverting to other kinds of things.
Hello, State's Attorney Rinehart. Welcome.
I am so sorry. I heard that wonderful introduction and I am here.
We welcome you. Thank you for your persistence. So take it away. We're ready to hear from you if you're ready for us.
Can you start your video or?
Not yet, just in a little bit when I get home. I just think everybody will get sick. I appreciate everyone's patience. I really apologize. I had an appointment that I had to do for my family. So, boy, I am just really happy to be here. I'm thrilled to be talking to people about how we can bring change to Lake County and to a legal system that really needs help and needs focus and direction. And the way you do that is to identify the problems clearly. And we have a lot of problems generally in our country, generally in our society, but we have to have the courage to say that those problems happen in Lake County. So my administration is going to be making Lake County safer and fairer. We have to acknowledge that crime continues to be a problem in Lake County, that there hasn't been enough focus on violent crime. But when we use the words fairer, we have to also acknowledge that there are too many socioeconomic and racial disparities in our courthouse and in how police are dealing with the residents of Lake County. And so I want to make sure that we are safer and fairer, both in our communities and in our courthouse. And that's going to be that was the theme of my campaign. And that's going to be the theme of my administration. So as I said, if you're going to fix any problems, you have to be able to identify them and to quantify them. So first, we have to be talking about data. We have to be identifying the disparities by publishing outcomes, by looking at arrest rates, by addressing racial profiling in our law enforcement agencies, but also by talking about how we see disparities in our courthouse. And we have to do something that nobody has ever done in Lake County before, which is to talk about those disparities and put those disparities in black and white in a public dashboard. That's what our sheriff, John Eidelberg, has been able to do. He's been able to receive grant funding for that. And I believe that I'll be able to access some of that same grant funding so that we can identify these problems. We also have to talk to the community more. We have to have more meetings like this and with our officials, and we have to have community panels that will speak truth to power about the problems that we have. We have to keep police accountable, and we have to work with our partners in law enforcement. I've been privileged to meet with so many great police chiefs throughout my first few days in office, and talk to them in a clear-eyed way about new training techniques, new technologies that will make everybody safe, but also bring accountability to a culture with respect to police departments that hasn't always had that culture of accountability. And so finally, we need to make sure that we are getting people the treatment that they need. We need to be expanding our treatment programs. We need to be expanding our approaches to mental health problems, making sure that we're not criminalizing mental health, that we're not criminalizing being poor if people aren't able to pay fines and costs. And we've got to get people the treatment that they need if they're suffering from substance abuse disorder. So those are some of the broad goals. I'm happy to answer questions and talk about some of the ways that I want to achieve those goals.
Thank you very much, State's Attorney Rinehart. I have a question. Could you share with us some ways in which the problems and issues that you face in Lake County might differ from those in Cook County? A lot of the leagues in Illinois will be studying these issues are from Cook County, and what aspects of these issues do you find unique to the situation that you're in?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I've practiced in Lake County for 17 years. And so I've seen these problems up close. We have a large county, right? We have 750,000 people who live in our county. It's this beautiful, diverse place. But we have a small legal culture. We have a small legal culture that has been dominated by one group. And I don't mean to get in. It's not really about partisan politics. It's about being one group. And it's been dominated by one group and one approach to thinking about problems that I hope to be changing. I'm not a career prosecutor. I'm a career lawyer. I'm a person who's spent my entire career in the criminal justice system, but I'm not a career prosecutor. I'm somebody who I hope brings new ideas. So first, we have to be willing to change the legal culture if it needs to be changed, not just change for the sake of change, but change because things are not working. We have to diversify our prosecutor's office. We have to diversify our set of judges. We have to be getting new ideas and new perspectives. The current state's attorney's office that I took over had no supervisors of color. It had very few women supervisors. I'm proud to say that my first assistant, the number 2 person in my office, is a woman of color. I'm proud to say that we'll be bringing on African American and Latino supervisors by February. So there's a real need for diversifying ideas and diversifying perspectives in our courthouse. And I think that is a little bit unique to Lake County in light of how diverse Lake County is, but the legal leaders are not. And I hope to change that. I think the other unique parts of Lake County is that we have many people who are undocumented, but who still deserve every protection of the law when it comes to domestic violence, when it comes to gang violence. We have to make sure that we're protecting every resident of Lake County. You're not going to hear me say we need to protect the citizens of Lake County. And sometimes I have to admit, sometimes I'll see our legal leaders slip into that kind of language and hopefully not that kind of thinking. But you won't see me talking about protecting the citizens of Lake County. We need to protect all the residents of Lake County, because that's our solemn mission, is to protect everybody regardless of their background or where they were born. So that's very important to me. And I think that's a unique problem to Lake County, that we're making sure that we're protecting every person here because everybody is morally equal. Even if some people may have a different set of legal problems, that's not my concern. It's the moral equality of every person who lives in Lake County that I am charged with protecting.
Thank you very much. I think Emily has a question that somebody had sent in when they were trying to register. Emily, can you unmute, and you have a question, right? I think she's unmuted now.
Okay, yes. Here's the question. There's a movement that is seeking legislation that prohibits police officers from shooting unarmed citizens. If there isn't a weapon found after someone has been shot by a police officer, this movement proposes that the officer should receive a mandatory 15-year prison sentence. What is your opinion or view?
So I'll be honest. I think that's too. I think that's a little too specific. I think that we need to make sure we have the right people making decisions on our bench and in our prosecutors' offices and in our command centers of our police agencies. We have to make sure that the right people are making decisions so that officers aren't involved in unjustified shootings. I think we must analyze our rules of engagement. I have to say, I remember learning what the legal rules were. And I got to say, there's been a lot of debate about how police officers are doing things, and so many police officers are great and wonderful. They protect us, and they need to make sure that they're getting home to their families every night, which is so important. But we don't really ever go back to first principles and examine the original rules of engagement and the original rules of what the officers' training is. So many problems come up now because officers are trained to make snap judgments about whether somebody is a risk to others, not a risk to themselves. All of the cases that are about a risk to themselves can kind of end up, we can see on camera what risk a person may pose, whether they have a weapon or don't have a weapon. Hopefully you can see that at least. But I wouldn't be for that law that made these things mandatory, or that said that if an officer didn't end up having a weapon, or if a person didn't end up having a weapon, that it had to be a mandatory sentence. I want to look at each case one by one. I have to do that right now with a couple cases in Waukegan, and that's my solemn responsibility and duty, and it's to look at the facts of every case. So I wouldn't want a rule that was said if the person didn't end up being armed, that an officer would go to prison if they were otherwise reasonable in trying to protect themselves, because you can make reasonable mistakes. The question is whether or not it was a reasonable mistake, and we see in cases like Laquan McDonald, that was not a reasonable mistake that Officer Van Dyke made. That Laquan was very far from Officer Van Dyke, and Officer Van Dyke had his weapon out, and Laquan was very far away from him. And so the jury said that was an unreasonable mistake. But you have to look at it case by case.
Thank you. Lynn, can you present our next question? Lynn Gaffigan is one of our criminal justice study group members from Lake Forest, Lake Bluff.
We have one from Valerie. How do you plan to go about partnering with community-based groups, particularly those that are interested in the impact of bail policies, police intervention with intimate partner violence and sex abuse?
Yeah. So a few things with respect to bail reform. I've been working with the sheriff's department and Sheriff Eidelberg, who is committed to analyzing incarceration rates and the unfairness of incarceration rates. There are the Administrative Office of Illinois Courts, the AOIC, is putting out new objective metrics to determine whether somebody is a risk to the community, so that a judge isn't just sort of getting a feeling by looking at somebody in a courtroom. I'm not saying that anybody is being conscious with respect to with bias, but there's a lot of implicit bias. So there's a document called the PSA, the Public Safety Assessment, which is attempting to remove some of these objective factors. So I've been working with the Sheriff's Community Council on that. That's a really important group. I would urge everybody to get involved in that. The Sheriff's Community Council is amazing. And I believe there's a link on Sheriff Heidelberg's website for that. With respect to intimate partner violence and domestic violence, I think that this was one of the most important parts of my campaign, was that the epidemic of domestic violence needs to be treated. We need to have a task force. We need to have a domestic violence initiative to focus on that and make sure that we're bringing new ideas and new perspectives to this battle. I'll be meeting with a Safe Places executive director next week. I've spoken a great deal with State Senator Melinda Bush, who is a real fighter in this area, and I'm advocating for Joyce Mason's reforms. If you look at Joyce Mason's domestic violence reforms, they're outstanding, and I believe in all of them. And I was very upfront with the legislation that I believed in the campaign, and I'm always going to be very upfront with the legislation I believe in, because one thing that people don't know about the state's attorney's office is that the state's attorney, that he or she should be advocating for reforms in Springfield, that they believe in, that the people of the county believe in. And so I don't believe in, veiling the reforms that I believe in Springfield. And so we're going to see reforms with the Pretrial Fairness Act, which is about bail reform. We should be seeing domestic violence reforms, and we should be seeing reforms that the Black Caucus will be putting forward regarding criminal justice issues. So I think we should be working with our community partners here in Lake County. We should be working with legislators like Joyce Mason, Melinda Bush, and we should be the state's attorney should be saying what in my case, what my view is on this legislation, different legislation.
So just as a follow-up to that, if I could, Lori, a lot of there are so many different levels of input into the decision making. And you mentioned some community-based groups. Is another aspect of that possibly looking at restorative justice programs and additional resources for problem-solving courts and things like that? And how could the community get involved in that way as well?
Absolutely, yeah. So the problem-solving courts, I'm very proud to say that my law partner Kevin Malia was on the original problem-solving courts here in Lake County. I learned a lot from him. He's a close friend and amazing lawyer, and the problem-solving courts were started some time ago by the judges who are rightfully the judges are very proud of our problem-solving courts. So look, it's really important to have the judges buy into a lot of these reforms. There are reforms that I can implement and have implemented already in my first couple of weeks, but let's be straight here. The judges love the problem-solving courts as well. They should, but they need to be expanded. And there have been a lot of instances with the prior state's attorney where people would be eliminated from the courts based on their background, based on mistakes they made. I think we should defer to the experts. I think if the experts say that somebody is ready for treatment, that they should get the treatment. And so that's the type of restorative justice that we're talking about. We should have a broader restorative justice program in our juvenile courts. And there is a pilot program that's gone dormant now because of COVID. I don't know if it needs to be dormant because of COVID. I think it should be expanded. And I've appointed a new fantastic juvenile justice a new juvenile supervisor. Her name is Karen. She's going to be amazing out there because we need a new approach in our juvenile courts when it comes to restorative justice. Our alternative prosecution program in Lake County, the day that I took over, it only had 11 people in it. That's not enough. We file about 2,000 felonies every year. The felony alternative prosecution program only managed to have 11 people in it on the day that I took over. That needs to be vastly expanded. There was a part-time volunteer lawyer, a very great advocate who was running that program, but it needs to be in the prior administration. It needs to be expanded and it needs to be fully staffed. And so we're going to have a full-time attorney assigned to handle the alternative prosecution courts, which is basically a form of restorative justice where you meet with the community and express remorse and a community panel. And so there's lots of different ways. And the last thing I want to say here, I'm sorry I'm giving such long answers. I'm very passionate about this. I want to have a strategic community planning council that actually has organizations appoint members to come to me, because I've heard of I've seen other states attorney panels and I've even seen them, I've seen these other panels where they were handpicked by the elected official or by the prior state's attorney. I want the organizations to send people to me. I don't want to pick yes people. I'm not putting friends on my community panel. I'm going to put people who are advocates and experts within their area. So the Coalition to Reduce Recidivism should send me a representative. A Safe Place should send me a representative. The Opioid Initiative should send me a representative, and they should speak truth to power to me to say how we need to do things differently. Stop ETO, they should send a person on this panel. And if they have to tell me to change things, then that's the way it's going to be. This is not going to be my handpicked set of friends.
Thank-
Thank you. I think Jared Rose, who's also a member of our Lake Forest Lake Bluff Criminal Justice Study Group, has a question. Jared, I think you're muted. Okay.
When you in the first thing you said, one of the things you said that really interested me was trying to create a culture of accountability among the police department. I was wondering, what reforms would you say are the most important towards that? And also, as a aside, what reforms would you say are more overlooked? You know, there's a lot of talk now in various communities about reforms. What reforms do you think need more attention from community members such as ourselves?
I think it's really important that we work to get a body camera on every officer. I've spoken to every police chief. I've spoken to police chiefs throughout my first couple weeks here. I've done several meetings with them, and every police chief I've talked to is for body cameras. So we don't have a divide in our legal community right now between whether or not we should have body cameras. It's a question of funding. And I believe that the state's attorney should be advocating in Springfield for increased funding, for pooling resources, for creating efficiencies and synergies. And I don't think we've seen that before, where the state's attorney is loudly and proudly saying what he believes in Springfield. So I'm going to go to Springfield and tell them, if this is the moment for criminal justice reform, then this is a moment where we can invest in body cameras. Another area, I want to talk about two other things here. And in my first couple weeks, I've already told every assistant in my office to do something that's never been done before. If a police officer is involved in a constitutional violation, send me a memo. Okay? If a judge has found that there was a constitutional violation, send me a memo. If the individual prosecutor believes that there was a constitutional violation and the case was dismissed, right? Send me a memo. Let's start to collect these things. We cannot identify the problem. We cannot identify the local problem unless we count it, unless we measure it. I don't mean to sound like, I don't mean to say, is it Bill James who invented sabermetrics in baseball? I don't mean to sound like Bill James here, but if we don't count things, we can't measure, we can't improve them. So we need to count how many departments are having constitutional violations. We need to put probably redacted information up on a website that simply says last week, a judge found that Waukegan officer had committed a constitutional violation. This matter is being addressed in training. Simply saying that is going to tell the public that we are working on this, because I have to say, as an attorney in this courthouse for 17 years, the reaction of the state's attorney's office for the last 17 years that I have been here has been to say that they disagree with the judge and close their file. There's never been a memo written, there's never been a counting of it, and there's never been a training of it. And guess what? I have good news for everybody here. The police officers want to hear what I just said. When I met with the chief and deputy chief of an agency here in Lake County, one of our bigger ones, I said that we would start counting these and that we would send out improvements and trainers to fix those problems. And the deputy chief said to me, good. Nobody ever tells us what we did wrong. They just tell us that the case is over. They just tell us that the case is compromised. Let's have clear, open communications with everybody. And if that means we have to have uncomfortable conversations, so what? The Constitution was violated. Somebody went to jail maybe and they shouldn't have. And that's the culture of accountability that we need.
Eric, here's an additional question from Christine on domestic violence. Do you plan to additionally focus on sexual violence, and in what ways?
So we have a fantastic child advocacy center here that I would encourage everybody to learn about and consider supporting. We have a fantastic child advocacy center, which I will, my second day in office, I went and met at the child advocacy center, which is involved in protecting children and prosecuting those who have harmed children. So I think we need to act more aggressively with respect to sexual crimes. When we are talking about criminal justice reform, we shouldn't only be talking about how are we going to make sure that the police are held accountable and that there aren't the racial disparities that I know everybody here wants to change in our country. But we should also be talking about focusing on the victims of domestic violence and the victims of sexual violence, because that's an important part of reform too. Because right now, throughout our country, there's too much of a scattershot approach. We're spending too many court dates. We're spending too many court dates on cases that don't need that much time, when we should be making sure that attorneys are working hard and working late into the night on sex cases. So not only would I make that more of a focus in our courtrooms, I also believe that we need a victims advisory panel. We've never had a victims advisory panel in Lake County. Now, there's just going to be a certain anonymity to that. Survivors of domestic violence and survivors of sexual violence may want to remain anonymous. But if people are willing to meet in a private council, then they can give me advice about things. I've already met with many survivors of domestic violence, and they've given me great advice about things that they need in our courthouse. I'll be doubling the number of victim witness coordinators who speak Spanish. A very big complaint in our courthouse has been that we don't have enough advocates for people who speak only Spanish. And we'll be increasing that number and assigning a Spanish speaker victim witness coordinator to our domestic violence courtrooms. I've hired, as far as I can tell, the first woman supervisor of domestic violence division. I've done that in these first couple of weeks. So there's a lot that needs to be done in this area, and I am dedicated to it.
Wow, that's a lot of reform, and we're all going to be watching with bated breath to see how that goes in Springfield. It's a lot of change for our community potentially. So let's go back a little bit to the process that happens before incarceration, to the arrest process itself. As everybody or most people know, Lake County is in the process of putting together a crisis center, which will provide some alternatives. We're not there yet, but could you comment on that and how you see your office interfacing with that, and what the prognosis looks like at this point in time? I know that they got recently some grant funding, and our group is hoping to bring in Donna Jo Mackey at a future point to talk in more detail.
Yeah, great. I want to be there because all I want to do is listen to Donna Jo Mackey explain how we can fund all of these reforms. So Donna Jo Mackey is amazing, and she is trying to have all of the stakeholders in Lake County, including the sheriff's office and the judges, buy into this. So if any of you know any judges, and you're not, judges are never going to talk to you about specific cases, and they never should. But if you're ever talking to a judge, tell them that Donna Jo Mackey is amazing, and that she has amazing ideas for reform. The sheriff is very committed to it, and now I'm very committed to it. The Lake County State's Attorney's Office will be explaining exactly what it's doing with the MacArthur Foundation. We'll be very open about that. That hasn't always been true in the immediate past. And so we're going to be very proud of our work with the MacArthur Foundation. The Crisis Center itself is an amazing program. We're actually looking for physical space. I've been on several meetings, both with Donna Jo Mackey and with the Opioid Initiative about that. And even today, I was on a meeting with that. And I have to give my predecessor credit. Mike Neerheim has stayed involved in the Opioid Initiative, which I know he founded, and that's a great credit to him as a person. Even though he and I have a lot of disagreements, the Opioid Initiative will continue to be a priority for the state's attorney's office. And this crisis center is, it's a real partnership. It's a partnership between the MacArthur Foundation, the state's attorney's office, which is the lead agency on the Department of Justice grants, which is $750,000, and also partners like the Opioid Initiative and NACASA. The Crisis Center is going to be a critical part of our plan to bring in restorative justice, because people will be able to be dropped off there and get the needs that they will be able to get the resources that they need, whether it's mental health crises, substance abuse crisis, and many other programs. So Donna Jo Mackey is a wealth of knowledge, and I hope you'll invite me to just listen. I won't talk this much. I'll just listen to Donna Jo.
Okay, so I'm getting a question. Who is Donna Jo? Could you explain a little bit about that? You're allowed to talk
Yes,
more.
yes, and by the way, I just got onto my laptop. If somebody wants to, here, I'll let's see. I'm gonna mute myself so I don't.
Okay, so okay, there, I think there you are. Wow, okay, right in the middle of my screen. Do we have audio from State's Attorney Rinehart? Can somebody unmute him?
I did.
Yes, hello. All right. Apologize for all of that. Donna Jo Mackey works for the county. She works for the county administrator, but she is responsible for so many grants that we're able to get from the outside. Grants are good because they're not taxpayer dollars. They are, wonderful government grants or donors that are interested in change. And the grants are not just restorative justice, but there's different types of grants for victims, for victim witness coordinators. I'm thrilled to say that we're expanding our number of victim witness coordinators through some grants that we're putting in for. And so these grants are very important. Donna Jo Mackey works for the county to work on all of these grants. And a big part of her work involves the MacArthur Foundation, which is committed to restorative justice and finding what are called justice partners. And so I'm happy to say that the Lake County State's Attorney's Office is one of those partners.
That's terrific. I know she's an attorney. I believe she's a former prosecutor or public defender. Do you know?
She's definitely been with the State's Attorney's Office, and she also, when I met her, she was an attorney general, an assistant attorney general many years ago, and I had cases with her in which she was an assistant attorney general. But I really, if you want to learn about what's going on, talk to Donna Jo. But I want to give a really neat example of something small but really cool. So the Public Defender's Office has had this for a while. I didn't even know this until last week. The Public Defender's Office has a text system in which it automatically texts clients with court updates, date updates for court. I had no idea. I've been an attorney in the county for a while, but I just did not know about this text program. And so, I can't make any guarantees, but I talked to Donna Jo and I said, where did that money come from? And she said it came from a grant. And so I said, we should have that for victims and witnesses. Nobody's ever thought of that before. We should have an automatic text program that tells victims and witnesses when their next court date is. Now, let me be clear. Our victim witness coordinators are amazing. They're counselors, they're resources, they help victims through their darkest time. I'm not saying that we're going to be having fewer counseling sessions or fewer phone calls, but all of us know that a phone call and a text is better than just a phone call. There's going to be witnesses who don't need counseling, right? The bar bouncer who saw the bar fight, he's okay. He's just a witness to what he saw. But now he's got an update for court, so we're not going to be scrambling around trying to find people when we're doing trials. It's an easy, up-to-date technological way that we can make sure. It's just one more way to make sure that witnesses and victims are fully integrated into the justice system.
Well, you don't know this, but actually one of the questions we were supposed to consider in our consensus is, should people like victims and witnesses be reminded, or should they be responsible to recall these dates on their own? So I guess we've heard your position on that, right?
Well, I did. Yeah. And we started that program. And one of the other directives I did in my first few days was to make sure that we were collecting emails. I know that sounds basic, but we have to have some policies about these things. And we need to be making sure that we're getting emails and getting email addresses and things like that. And our victim witness coordinators do a fantastic job. I've been honored to be part of the process that's been hiring some more. And they're outstanding people. And they got a lot of cases, right? It's a bandwidth issue. And so they're doing a great job, but if we can provide some help to them with something like an automatic text system, I think that's a great use of technology and a potentially great use of grant money.
Thank you. Lynn?
So a lot of information. You've covered things, we've looked at things like data collection and how that could be improved and helpful in our own committees, and you've talked a little bit about how the sheriff's going to be gathering some data and providing more. And then there's also use of technology, improving communication. You've touched on funding and how important that is, and also training for the police and tracking and transparency. There's also some research we've looked at that says how important it is to get investment in the community, not just funding for programs, but just more investment, public and private, in communities, and how that can have such an impact on the criminal justice system and crime and safety. Joy wonders, what are your top 3 priorities? And I've just named a few things that you've already touched on a little. Do you have, if you have to prioritize, what are your, for criminal justice reform, do you have a top 3?
Well, I think I have to be honest. I think for these first 2 weeks, I've been trying to get the right people in the right places.
Yeah.
I've been trying to get those new supervisors who are dedicated to some of these other ideas that we've been talking about. We're trying to get the new supervisors who are dedicated to these reforms and to an inclusive approach to criminal justice. I can't tell you how many people have said to me, Eric, when Latino and African American people walk into a courtroom, they see a white judge, a white prosecutor, a white defense attorney, a white clerk, a white deputy, several white deputies, and that matters. And so that's one of the things that I'm working hard to work on. So I have to say that getting the right people in these roles, I am reorganizing the office a little bit, because we've had a lot of supervisors. There's some supervisors are only supervising 3 or 4 people, and they're pulling in supervisor pay. And so we do have to look at fiscal responsibility, not only for the taxpayers, but so that we can do these other programs that I think are a better service to the people. So I do have to, it's tough to talk about personnel issues, but my gosh, we're talking about putting people in jail, right? We're talking about people who've survived violent crime. We're talking about people who may die from violent crime. So if you really think about connecting all these things, personnel is always tough to talk about, but so is talking to a loved one, because we didn't align our resources correctly. A loved one who wasn't treated properly, the loved one of a victim of a crime who wasn't treated properly by the system. So we have to align our resources correctly. But I also think we have to restore the link between our courthouse and the people by talking a little bit more openly about some of our past problems. I said in the campaign that I wanted to start a report about why those prior cases have happened. Everybody knows about Lake County's wrongful convictions, but there's never been a public report about why those things happen. So I'm going to have a new conviction integrity unit. There is a case review panel, which my predecessor started, but isn't reviewing that many cases. And I think we need to have a conviction integrity unit that works with those fine volunteers, but that's also working in-house to look at why a lot of things have happened. So I think the establishment of a professional conviction integrity unit that isn't just looking at 1 or 2 cases every few months, but a professional conviction integrity unit. I think putting the proper people in putting the right people in the right places to implement these reforms. And I think expanding our alternative prosecution program in misdemeanor right away is a way to funnel our resources towards prosecuting violent crimes. Those are some of my plans. I think that strategic council, which is going to bring in people from these different groups and have the group send the person, not just me hand selecting somebody, but having the group sending some people. I think that's going to buy in the community more, because I think the community wants to be talking to the state's attorney more. I think the community wants to have more town forums. But if the sense is that the state's attorney is just putting his 4 or 5 friends on it, then I don't think that's what we need. I think we need different. Different ideas in the room.
Thank you. Who's
Jerry,
next?
you have a question? Or do you have a follow-up, Lynn?
this is another question from the chat, once again from Valerie, who is asking, what is your idea about how to wrap in faith-based organizations when it comes to outreach to undeserved communities on things like legal advocacy, information about criminal processes, and access to services?
Yeah, I want those faith-based organizations to send people to the Strategic Council. I was, I was always very honored to meet with any of the clergy or the leaders, the religious leaders. It was a little bit tougher during COVID, but I did meet with rabbis and other ministers to hear their concerns. And I think it's very important. Some of my most powerful meetings were with members of the clergy who really drove home to me to think about my own children, frankly, in terms of not in a negative way, but just to say, think about how people are feeling on the streets right now when their children are at risk of violent crime. And it really, I remember that conversation like it was yesterday, and it really drove that home. So I think that the faith-based organization should have a seat on this strategic council. And I think just as importantly, they need to be involved in a violent crime initiative where we really look at why these things are happening in our communities. I believe in bringing in violence interrupters, which has worked in the Austin neighborhood. I went to the Austin neighborhood during the campaign and just listened to what was going on down there and watched what was going on down there. And the Austin neighborhood has been devastated by gun violence. But I remember asking the gentleman who, Chris Patterson, who runs the Nonviolence Institute, I said, what's the size of this neighborhood, these blocks that you've confined this initiative to? And he said it was 200,000. And I remember, well, that's smaller than Lake County, but it might cover some of the more troubled areas in the east and in the center where that have had more problems with gang violence. And so I want to bring these new ideas into our county, and faith-based organizations played a big role in the violence interrupting that we saw in the Austin neighborhood. And I should add, violence is way down in the Austin neighborhood since the Nonviolence Institute got involved.
Wow, that's really amazing. I was not aware of that initiative. So going back to some of the systems and things in place during your predecessor's time, one of the issues that's, I think, complicated for non-attorneys to understand is the notion of felony murder. And I was wondering if you could briefly explain what it is and what's happened in Lake County and what your views are, what you plan to do about that issue.
Yeah, so felony murder is it's a rule, frankly, that if you ever go to law school, and I encourage everybody here to go to law school. If you ever go to law school, it's a day that sticks with you in criminal law. It really sticks with you, and it's basically the rule that if anybody dies during the commission of a felony, and then I'm going to put some caveats in here. If anybody dies during the commission of a felony, then all of the people involved in the felony can be charged with murder. Now, typically it has to be a violent felony. Okay, so if I'm driving on a revoked license, and I hit somebody through no fault of my own, I may have other driving problems, but I haven't committed felony murder, because driving on a revoked license could be a felony, but it's not a dangerous felony. So it has to be a dangerous felony. But it also has to have a separate independent purpose. I'm not trying to sound like a law school professor, but if I punch somebody and they die, I may have a murder problem, but I don't have a felony murder problem because it's the same act. Okay, so punching somebody and then them dying is a murder issue, but it's not there's not another felony. So what are we talking about? Most felony murders are robberies, right? Somebody dies during the commission of a robbery, an armed robbery. Somebody dies during the commission of a home invasion where nobody planned on anyone to die, but if one of the people who commits an armed robbery shoots the store clerk, then everybody involved in that armed robbery has committed felony murder. Okay, that's the basics of felony murder. Last year in 2019, there was a very well-known felony murder case in which 5 younger people, and it is important they're young, 5 youth, juveniles, and a 19-year-old were walking up a driveway, probably intending to steal a car. And the homeowner saw these 5 young people coming up his driveway towards the car, and let's just say they were probably going to steal the car. And he shot and killed one of these 5 young people. Not debating whether he should have shot somebody. He was never charged. Not having that debate. That's a separate debate. All of the other 4 surviving kids were charged with felony murder because they were committing a felony by potentially trying to steal a car and somebody died. The problem was none of them were armed. The problem was none of them had a gun. And so we can put the scrutiny on the homeowner and say, why is he kind of shooting into the night when he has a gun and he doesn't just lock his doors, call 911 and sit there with a gun? We can have that whole debate about what he should have done. But you've got this other problem where the state's attorney's office charged all of the youth with felony murder. So that was the controversy, was should the other young people have been charged with our top charge in our system, of course, which is murder. So that's the kind of background. I said at that time, and I still believe now, that those youth should not have been charged with murder, that was a mistake that my predecessor made, that he made that decision in 12 hours, that wasn't necessary. He eventually backed down from it after several months of outrage and community groups saying that they disagreed with him. I don't think it had to do with me. I was one person clearly saying how I felt, but it was many great groups, Joby Cates and Restore Justice. If that's a group you don't know about, learn about them. Restore Justice Illinois is an amazing advocacy group that I think many of you would be interested in. And so Joby Cates pushed, and faith-based groups pushed, and my predecessor dismissed the murder charges. I don't think they should have ever been charged with murder. I don't think 5 unarmed kids who are stealing a car and one of their group dies, I don't think that's the proper use of the felony murder rule. And that gets to the power of the prosecutor. That gets to the power of his or her discretion to make those decisions. And people don't understand that. People think that prosecutors just open a book and say, well, this is the law. And we're talking about restorative justice. We're talking about discretion. We're talking about how we can make our system better. And what we're really talking about is a prosecutor's discretion. And so it's not simply what is the law. And my predecessor said I was following the law. Well, but he also reduced the charges later. So he used his discretion to reduce the charges. So that wasn't following the law, or it was following the law. But the discretion all fits within the law. But his discretion on the front end was he shouldn't have filed the charges. So that's the felony murder debate that happened in Lake County. I would use felony murder incredibly sparingly. I'm not an abolitionist. I'm not completely against the felony murder rule. I think if people arm themselves with firearms and go out to commit a crime and somebody dies, I think they're probably going to go down for felony murder because they've chosen to arm themselves. But you get into these crazy scenarios with felony murder where nobody is armed, but it's technically felony murder. I do not think it should be used in those cases. And that was a really long answer. I'm sorry.
It was a very complete answer, and it covers a lot of the actual questions that we're considering. So thank you for that. But following up on that, what about charging and enhancing charging because of a violent weapon such as a gun? That's another issue that we're looking at in terms of whether should that be abolished or not.
Well, no, I think it has to be on a case by case. I think it has to be on a case by case basis. I really want to emphasize that we've got to look at youth and emerging youth. I would urge this group to, follow the research that the Supreme Court has finally acknowledged a few years ago about how children are different. That's why I'm proud to say that I have such a great juvenile leader that will be starting on Monday there. I think she really understands that. And so, when young people have guns, I don't think that means that they have to that they lose all their chances. Okay, now if you're talking about using a gun, if you're talking about shooting at somebody, that's totally different. That's a very violent offense, and there have to be very serious consequences to protect the community. But there are a lot of situations where younger people are getting in trouble for simply having a gun in a car full of people. That's a very common scenario. And those are mandatory prison sentences. I think we have to look at everything on a case-by-case basis. I think sending a young person to prison for their very first time is a really big deal because really bad things happen in prison and really bad things are taught in prison. And we have to acknowledge that prison is necessary to protect the public, that prison is necessary to send a message that we will not tolerate violence against people. But we have to really think, and I'll listen to people about this. And some people disagree with me on this. We have to think about whether or not every time a 19-year-old has a gun in a glove box, and there's nothing else going on, and it doesn't seem like anything else is going on, that's an automatic prison sentence. Maybe we need to talk to that person about what else was going on and get some information about them. Now, obviously, repeat offenders and people who are threatening people are going to have to go to prison to protect our society. But we really have to think about how we're dealing with young people.
So do you have specific protocols or ideas that would be reform oriented with respect to treating emerging adults as they come into the system, apart from what's being done now?
Yeah, I think that for the most part, so I think we need to, I'm open to having a gun court where we talk to, I think that's been successful in some counties, where we talk to young people about why they had the gun. I think that we have to, get more guns off the streets, right? Like, guns are killing people. And so we have to have, I think, more bills in Springfield that close some loopholes. I support the, closing the various void loopholes, because we just need to decrease the total number of guns. I think that we should be talking about innovative solutions like buybacks and different programs to just get more guns off the streets. I think it does matter how many total guns you have on the street. Everybody can say, well, more guns will come up from Chicago. Well, I don't know. We still took 200 guns off the street. So I think we have to look at these programs. But when it comes to restorative justice, I think we need to be talking to the youth about why these things happen. I think we need to be giving them some special probation that says, if you can stay on the straight and narrow, then we're not going to send you to prison. But it needs to be, we have these problem solving courts that do a great job with mental health, with veterans, and with substance abuse, because they're intervening in their lives on a weekly basis. I think we should be doing the same thing with at-risk youth. I think we should be doing the same thing with that 19-year-old kid who had the gun and who some prosecutors might send to prison. But I think we should see if there's a way to not do that.
Thank you. So I don't see any more questions in the chat box. I was wondering if anybody from the Criminal Justice Study Group, I see Lynn, has any further follow-up questions. And if you do have questions and you haven't put them in the chat box yet, please do so, because we're coming toward the end of our program here. Thank you. Lynn?
I'm enjoying your discussion about restorative justice. And one of the things I was thinking about what you just said was, that's an opportunity for the community to get involved in a circle or some sort of program to give their input, and for the victim to have a say in certain circumstances, and for a young person to really understand and connect with some of the consequences of their behavior. And so funding, it comes back to funding so often for things like that. Is that just part of the bigger funding issue? Or are there specific resources or ways that, to really engage the community in something like that? And the other piece of that is, how well will the community, how receptive will communities be to creating alternatives that include a voice for the victims, but also don't have punishment as that narrow goal?
I think that's such a hard question. I'll acknowledge my own privilege here. I have not been a victim of a crime. I have not had a close family member be a victim of a crime. And the first thing I think we need to do is make sure that we're listening to the victims, which is why I want that panel. It's very hard to tell a victim in an incredibly serious case, well, we have what I've heard the balance and restorative justice. We have this restorative approach, and we're making you do this, or this is the only way. Mm-hmm. We have to listen to victims. Right. They're the number one priority of any prosecutor's office, and so we have to listen to them. We have to make sure that they have bought in. I don't think it's going to work if they haven't bought in. But having said that, we have to try really hard. We have to convince people. We have to teach them. I think there's like a 30-minute video. About how to be a juror before you go upstairs to be a juror. Okay. Being a victim is a much more personal thing. But if you think about it, we think that we can teach jurors some principles that they need to know in 30 minutes. And I'm not saying that would ever be enough for a victim, but there might be smaller cases where we could do some educational programs, and people who are on the fence will say, well, I'll listen to the educational program or I'll read the research, but there are going to be people who aren't going to buy in, and I don't think it'll work if we don't. But having said that, we have to try more. You know, the alternative prosecution program, that's right. When I was on the phone earlier and not on camera, I was saying there were only 11 of those in felony right now. That's ridiculously low, but that's what I took over. We're going to expand that. But there is a restorative justice part of it, which is that those people have to go and speak to a panel, which obviously we're going to keep that part of it, but we're just going to make it much bigger. We're going to have more panels. We need to expand the restorative program in the juvenile courts from a pilot program to a real program. So I think we should do that. I think we'll get plenty of, I think we'll get plenty of volunteers for the community panels. But obviously, you're never going to get a volunteer for the victim because nobody's going to volunteer to be a victim. But I do hope that victims will opt in. I hope that they'll consider speaking publicly afterwards about the positive experience, maybe on an educational video or something like that. But that's going to be a slow process because it's so internal to all of us that if our family members have been hurt or if we've been hurt, to have anger and there's nothing wrong with that, right? That's how, to have grief. And so it's a very delicate process. And it's also something that, again, I'm admitting I have not been personally touched by it, by being a victim of a serious crime. But with property crimes, of course, with smaller crimes, of course, and we need to be doing it more so that we begin to build our experiences about how to do it, maybe up the ladder a little bit.
And indeed, it can be empowering to victims. That is the goal, not to put them on the spot or scare them.
Of course. But,
yeah. And Lori comments that juvenile victim offender mediation and other restorative justice practices have been in place in Lake County. And that was what you started talking about early on, that they're there, but because of COVID, it's been difficult to.
Well, it's a pilot. It's a pilot program. Well, I was out there. It's a pilot program right now, and we need something much bigger than a pilot program. Right. And it's also been shut down because of COVID. And I'm not sure why it can't be done, why some of these things couldn't be done over Zoom if the victims were willing to do it. So, but the point is it needs to be larger than a pilot program, and there need to be very big changes in our juvenile justice system. Some in the past there have been refusals to opt into the restorative model, and there have been refusals to accept grant money. And so I'm happy to have any debate that anyone would like to have about the juvenile justice system in Lake County.
Thank you.
Funding is another topic, and obviously it impacts a lot of these subjects, and maybe we'll try to get you back for a little bit of wisdom on funding. But I think we're coming close to the end of our hour. I think Jared has maybe a final question, if there are no other questions in the chat box.
Yeah, I have one final question. It should be on the shorter end, but when you talk about felony
hopefully I don't talk too long.
I was merely talking on my end, but when you talk about felony murder and additional charges for gun crimes, you spoke a lot about how you favor maintaining prosecutorial discretion as opposed to hard abolition. I was wondering if there are certain things currently under your discretion that you would favor a simple abolition, or if you think the prosecutorial discretion is a key element in pretty much across the board.
Great question. Fantastic question. Really good question. So I struggle with this because I think that the people of Lake County, or the people of any county, to some extent are electing a prosecutor who is going to do the things that he or she says they're going to do. And so the thing that I said I was going to do was bring a restorative but smart approach to prosecuting. So on the one hand, I want to do the things that I said I was going to do and implement them as policies, because I kind of think that's how democracy works. But I also understand the importance of individual cases and having prosecutors that we trust to do these things. So first, we have to have the right prosecutors. There are a lot of not right prosecutors there, respectfully, that we are making changes. So you have to have the right people there. But yeah, there are a couple things that I'm happy to, there are a couple things that I think that we should talk about. So currently, the prior administration would file burglary charges. I understand they may have done that even recently. We're gonna, like my office did it in my name recently, which we're gonna fix tomorrow. But because some things are in the pipeline. But I guess the office would do a lot of filing burglary charges on a retail theft. So for anybody who doesn't know, very quickly, sorry, it did turn into a long answer, Jared. Burglary is when you break into a building. Burglary is when you break into a building and steal something or want to commit a felony inside. Maybe a garage, maybe a store, maybe a house. If you break into a house, it's a really big deal, and that's non-probationable as it should be, okay? Breaking into a house is a big deal, or it starts out as non-probationable. That's burglary. Everybody knows what a burglary is. Retail theft is when you go into a store in the middle of the day or in a lighted store and you take something and then leave. The current office, the past administration, I should say, would charge those as burglaries because technically it can be done. We are going to stop doing that. It's not a burglary. There may be a reason to file retail thefts, but burglaries are class 2 felonies, which are very high, and they feed into the 3-strike system. Which I can begin to work on, but the 3-strike system is something that a judge can do with or without the prosecutor's involvement. And so a burglary is a class 2 felony, which puts it into what is called our 3-strike system, which makes it non-probationable. I'm not doing that anymore. We're not charging retail thefts as burglaries, and young kids plead to a burglary in order to get out of jail. So that's one example of a clear abolition. Where I don't think that we will ever do that. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good example. I think that the felony murder, well, I'm going to be reviewing all those cases. There's not going to be a felony murder that'll be reviewed by a line assistant. I mean, excuse me, I'm obviously going to review all felony murders. I think we need to take a serious look at how we're dealing with car forfeitures. We are forfeiting a lot of vehicles from working class and poor people because they had a driving unrevoked or DUI. I believe in all the penalties for DUIs, but if you believe in the DUI penalties and treatment and scram bracelets, which means you can't drink, I'm not sure if we need to be taking people's cars. It's kind of a regressive tax. If you want to fine people, fine them, but taking away their cars in the middle of a case before anyone's been convicted has seriously hurts families that are just trying to go to work. So I think we have to look at that policy. I'm not talking about Lamborghinis for Tony Montana. Okay, I'm not talking about cars for drug dealers. I'm talking about you can forfeit somebody's car on a driving unrevoked. Many people's licenses are revoked because they can't afford to get their license reinstated. So it's kind of a regressive tax. So I think we need to look at that. But yeah, I think I think we'll be doing some things. But Jared, you have to give me some time, and but I'll be open with you about it.
Thank you very much. I think this is a good question to end on. I don't see any other questions in the chat box. And at this point, I'd like to just thank everybody and make a short announcement. So thank you to everybody here for participating during the holiday season. To learn more about criminal justice, thank you especially to our speaker, State's Attorney Rinehart, who on a day when he had an emergency personal appointment, took the time to talk to us from his car. It's really incredible, and hope we could hook you up quickly enough. Thank you to our tech hostesses, Rosemary Heileman from the president of the Deerfield League, and Katie Anderson, Vice President of Program for Lake Forest. Thank you to our criminal justice committee members, Lynn Gaffigan, Jared Rose, and the other ones who joined but couldn't join by video. Thanks to Emily Watts for answering questions. And thank you basically everybody for participating. We are planning some additional programs. One is on, this is all part of our criminal justice study. One of them will be on investing in underserved communities. And that will be with North Chicago Mayor Sam Rockingham and former Executive Director of the State League of Women Voters, Audra Wilson, and Tom Corning from the Renew Group, who builds houses in North Chicago. I think it's gonna be the first week in January. We're finalizing the date now. Another one will be on policing and a third one on emerging adults. So those will all take place in the first 2 weeks of January. I was hoping to have some more in December, but the scheduling got kind of bunched up. So if you're not a member of the league and you'd like to participate in these programs, please put some information in the chat box, how we can get in touch with you or how you found out about them. If you are a member of the league, we will have information on our website and on Facebook. And if you also in our weekly newsletter, The Voter, which comes to you by email. So we hope that this program has given all of you a little bit more insight into the criminal justice process. And in particular, I was very glad to see a very complete and well thought out vision presented by State's Attorney Rinehart. It's really very comprehensive amount of information that you've presented, and you've only been in office like 2 weeks or something like that, a little more than 2 weeks. So amazing progress, and we look forward to following the reforms as our state moves along and Springfield considers some of these issues. So once again, thank you, and I wish everybody a very healthy and happy holiday season.
Thank you so much, everybody, for your time. Thank you for your patience at the beginning. I really do apologize for that. And thank you so much, Lori, for inviting me and letting me give kind of long answers. I do apologize, but please email me. I'm going to put my personal email in. If anybody has questions, I'm happy to answer questions. And these issues are so important, and it's just so important that we just openly, we just think about these things and treat these problems like adults and not gloss them over with cliches. But talk about hard facts and hard statistics. So I'm going to put my personal email in, and please, anybody email me, and please watch out for announcements from our office for some of these community panels.
Thank you very much. We'll be saving the chat so that information will go out to people who watch the recorded version as well. Thank you, everybody.
I'm going to stop the recording right now.